Good day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's EFAL lesson. My name is Sipati Ratebe, and this lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saipono Discovery Center and broadcast by Pakama Research and Development. Kindly note that there's a WhatsApp interactive number, and the number is 064 748 8913. I repeat, 064 748 8913. You are more than welcome to use that interactive number for any clarity seeking questions. We will definitely get back to you. Right, let's have a look at today's lesson. The structure of the lesson. In this lesson, we will focus on the following aspects. We will focus on the longer transactional text, which forms our section B, how to approach answering the transactional question. Do you remember the requirements for this section? Just a kind reminder for that. The candidate will be expected to answer only one question in this section. 4 questions will be set, at least 1 and a maximum of 2 from each of the given categories. Let's just recap the exam instructions. You are expected to choose only one longer transactional text from the ones given. The body of your response should be between 120 and 150 words in length. Write down the number and the heading of the text you have chosen. For example, 2.1, a friendly letter, or 2.2, an obituary, 2.3, a speech. Your longer transactional text will be assessed according to a 30 marks rubric. You need to pay particular attention to format, language, and register. Remember to plan, edit, and proofread your text, clearly indicating planning and cross it out before submitting. Let's have a look at the categories in this section. There we go. Remember these categories? Yes. We've got 3 categories in this section. We've got category A, we've got category B, and we've got category C. In category A, we've got the following text. We've got a friendly letter, we've got a formal letter, we've got a CV and a covering letter, as well as an email. In category B, we've got the following. We've got reviews, newspaper article, magazine article, agenda and minutes, formal or informal reports, as well as an obituary. Category C, it has the following: a dialogue or a written interview, as well as a written formal or informal speech. In category A, we have already done a friendly letter, a formal letter, and an email in our previous session. And in category B, we have done an obituary in the last session. And in category C, we did a dialogue and a written interview. So today we will focus more on category B. That is reviews, newspaper article, magazine article, agenda and minutes, formal and informal reports, as well as category C, which is a written informal or formal speech. Remember those categories. Let's now start with our category B, reviews. A review is an individual's response to a work of art, an individual's response to a film, a book, an occasion, etc. A review goes beyond just reporting. It evaluates as well. The reviewer projects his or her judgment to the work presented. The reviewer acts a judge and weighs the accomplishment and merits of what is being reviewed. The reviewer cannot mention every aspect of a book or performance, and therefore chooses what he or she considers significant. Reviewer is usually appreciative and critical as well, because a work is not all good or all bad. Reviewer informs and entertains and is expected to present proof that he or she is familiar with his subject so that his or her judgment can be trusted. What about the reader? The reader wants to gain an impression or idea of what the film or a book or a play is like. The reader of the review does not have to agree with the reviewer. As a result, two reviewers may respond differently to the same text. Let's have a look at the format of a review, starting first with the introduction. In the introduction, that is where you give a brief background of either a book, a film, or an occasion. What about the body? In your body, that is where you also give us a brief discussion of key incidents without giving away the plot. That is also very, very important. You need not give away the plot. We also have a conclusion. In your conclusion, that is where you come up with personal opinion or recommendations. What about the style and the tone of a review? The style is formal, right? Remember what the style is? We spoke about the style in our last presentation. When one talks about the style, that refers to the word choice. So here we've got a formal tone, giving the word choice that would be given in this text. And of course, it is also subjective. Why? Because it's a personal opinion. Right. When writing a review, the following must be included. Number one, the title of the movie or the title of a particular book. The author, the director, or the producer. A review must contain a brief discussion of the setting, characterization, stylistic effects, the style of writing, a judgment and recommendation. So after you have written your review, you've got that checklist to use against your text. Check if you have included factual details like the title or the name of the place. Check if you have noted the name of the author or the lead actors. Check if you have included publishing company information or record label. You also need to check if you have included an area where the place is situated. And lastly, you've got to check if you made use of paragraphs. That is very, very important. Right. Let's have a look at our first activity. Remember, you will be given an activity after each and every text, together with the guideline to the activity. You are kindly requested to use the guideline in an attempt to answer whatever activity you will be given at the end of each and every text. So our first activity here It's from NSC paper for the year 2016. Let's have a look at that activity. It's a review. You are the owner of a store that hires out films or DVDs. You provide reviews of film to assist your customers in their selection. That is our brief. Remember, the most important thing is that you understand the brief. And for you to understand the brief, you've got to be able to analyze the brief and come up with key aspects that would help you to respond well to the brief. So let's have a look at that brief. The first thing that we have taken note of is that you are the owner of a store. And what store is that? A store that hires out films and DVDs. You provide reviews of films. Why do you do that? You do that to assist your customers in their selection. That is a common practice in your store. Let's have a look at the instruction. Write a review of a recently released film or DVD that is suitable for family viewing. That is the most important thing that you've got to look at that instruction. You've got to write a review, not of an old film or an old DVD, a recently released film. And that film has to be suitable for family viewing. So we've got the audience there, right? Family. So let's have a look at the guidelines of that activity. The first thing that you've got to take note of is the tone and the register. The tone, the language that you would use. Remember, the language that you use creates the tone, or it sets up the tone. And the register, right? They should be appropriate for the target audience. The target audience in this case is a family. The content must be suitable for family viewing. And the following information should be included in the review, among others. The title of the film or the DVD. Number 2, a description of plot, main characters, and key incidents. The third one, a judgment or evaluation, the rating of the film or the DVD. Some of the following may be included: the genre, the setting, the plot, the style, lighting, camera, as well as the camera angles. The director, the producer of the film, or the producer of the DVD. They may also be included. So before we move to the next transactional text, remember what I said. I have given you an activity. You have to use the guidelines that I've provided you with in an attempt to respond to the brief in that activity. I would love to believe that you got that. Let's now move to our magazine or newspaper article. A magazine or newspaper article is written to inform, persuade, and entertain. The style and the tone of an article written for a school magazine will differ from an article written for a local newspaper or magazine. When called to write a newspaper or magazine article, the reporter should state facts briefly but accurately. Let's have a look at the newspaper article. When writing a newspaper article, the following is recommended. Number 1, give a brief title and add a clear subheading. The article must not be long-winded, including unnecessary details. The reporter must strive to communicate the essence without losing the reader. That is also important. We don't want to lose the reader. You start with the most important fact, which addresses who did what, how, when, where was it done, why was it done, and to what extent. Those are the most important facts that you need to include in your newspaper article. Let's move to magazine article now. When writing a magazine article, you need to consider the following. The article must have a suitable heading. The heading must be attractive and interesting. The style should be personal, speaking directly to the reader, and it must have clearly defined paragraphs. When writing a magazine article, you must also consider the following regarding the paragraphs. Your paragraphs should not be too long, encouraging the reading of the article. Names, places, times, positions, and any other necessary details should be included in the article. The article should stimulate interest and keep the reader absorbed. Remember, we don't want to lose our reader. So your article needs to stimulate interest and keep the reader absorbed in that article. At the end of the article, check if you have the following. Have you included a headline or a byline? Have you noted the name of the writer, the date, as well as the place? Have you included the information in columns? Did you use a formal register? And lastly, did you make use of paragraphs? That information will assist you in giving a good transactional text regarding your magazine article. Right, let's have a look at this activity now. Our activity 2, which is a magazine article taken from the 2020 NSC paper. Let's read the brief. Choosing your career wisely will determine your financial success in the future. That's the background that we have been given here. What's the instruction? Write an article for a local magazine in which you provide advice to the readers on how to choose a career. You are expected to write an article to a local magazine. What are you supposed to do? What is the purpose? You are expected to provide advice to readers on how to choose a career. So from that brief, we've got the purpose why you've got to write that article, and we are also being given our audience. Let's have a look at the guidelines. An article for a local magazine giving advice. The first thing that you need to take note of is that the article must have a suitable heading. It must have clearly defined paragraph. It must provide advice to the readers on careers. The style thereof should be personal, speaking directly to the reader. The language may be formal. The article should be stimulating. Remember, we don't want to lose our reader. So it has to be interesting. It must also be stimulating. So use all of those guidelines to write an article at the end of the session. Your teacher will assist you with your end product and correct you when necessary. We are now moving to the next transactional text, which is report writing. This can either be formal or informal. Let's have a look at our reports. When we talk of reports, what are we actually talking about? Reports are factual accounts on summaries written in a formal, concise manner. Reports often consist of the following: person addressed, that is the recipient. Your report must also have the sender. We need to have the title of the report. Others call it the subject. That is also important. There should be a procedure that would be clearly outlined in terms of that particular report. What procedure are we going to follow? There should be findings. We also need to have conclusion. We need to make recommendations as well. And after you have made the recommendations, you also need to write the date as well as the signature. That is what you need to take note of when you write a report. It is important that all of those aspects are included in your report. Right. We've got a formal report as well as an informal report. Let's have a look at the format of both formal and informal report. For a formal report, the format thereof, we must have the recipient. We need to have a sender. We also need to have a topic. And lastly, we need to have an introduction. In your introduction, that is where you give a brief explanation of the background as well as the purpose of the report. Let's move on to the informal report and see if we can spot any differences between the two. In the informal report, we need to have a recipient. It's a must. There must also be a sender. We also need to have a topic, and we also need an introduction, which briefly explain the background and purpose of the report. So as far as the format is concerned, for both formal and informal report, they look the same. Now, let's look at the body of both formal and informal report. For a formal report, your body would be made up of an investigation. What is an investigation? That is the procedure that would be followed to gather information. Your body would also be made up of findings, your findings. And these findings are based on the investigation. Let's have a look at the informal report, the body thereof. When it comes to an informal report, your body should be made up of a factual account of incidents, a factual account of an accident, or a factual account of a particular situation. And in that account, you would be addressing who did what, why was that done, where was it done, when. The time factor, it is also important. When was it done? What happened? And how did it happen? So, for you to give a good factual account of any incident or an accident or any situation, you need to answer the who, why, where, when, what, and how. Let's look at the conclusion of both formal and informal reports. For a formal report, in your conclusion, you briefly draw together findings and recommendations. It is important that you draw together your findings as per your investigation as well as your recommendations. Whereas in an informal report, in your conclusion, you only give us summary of your findings. So here is just a brief summary of your findings. Let's now have a look at the recommendations for both formal and informal. For a formal report, you would be expected to give recommendations. And what informs your recommendations? Your recommendations will be given based on the findings. After you have given the recommendation, you now sign and date your report. In this instance, formal language needs to be used. And what about an informal report? In an informal report, this is what you need to put in your recommendations. Remember, regarding your informal report, you did not make any investigation. So you cannot come up with recommendations based on that investigation. So what you need to do here, you just sign and date the report. Informal format, but formal language to be used. What do you mean by formal language? It means that you are not expected to use slang or colloquial language. That is the recommendations regarding an informal piece. Right. Let's have a look at our activity 3. This activity is based on the 2018 NSC paper. From this activity, we will be given instructions and the guidelines. At the end of the presentation, you are kindly requested to respond to the brief in this regard. Let's have a look at the brief. You recently witnessed a burglary at your neighbor's home. The police have asked you to write a report describing what you had seen. Write the formal report. Remember what I said earlier. The most important thing that you need to understand regarding any transactional text, or even if it's an essay, the most important thing, you should be able to analyze the topic. You should be able to analyze the brief. So let's try to analyze that brief. It says you recently witnessed a burglary. Where? At your neighbor's home. Right? And the police have asked you to write a report. Who asked you to write the report? The police. So what does that mean? It means this report is a police report. It is not just any other report that you would write to any other person. It is not a report to your neighbor, a report to your parents, a report to your friend. It is a police report. And in that report, you are expected to describe what you had seen. And the instruction says, write the formal report. Look at that brief again. I'll read it once more. You recently witnessed a burglary at your neighbor's home. The police have asked you to write a report describing what you had seen. Write the formal report. Right. Remember, when reporting a burglary, the officer needs to know the following. Were the premises secured against forced entry? That information needs to be in the report. Where were the owners at the time? Were they asleep? Or weren't they at home? When and how was the forced entry discovered? The time is also key there. And how was the forced entry discovered? What was taken? And what steps were taken to report the forced entry? So if you are reporting any burglary, that information is needed by the officer. Were the premises secure against forced entry? Where were the owners at the time? When and how was the forced entry discovered? What was taken? What steps were taken to report the forced entry? Let us now have a look at the guidelines. This will assist in writing or responding to the brief. That is the report to the police about house burglary. The report must be addressed to the investigation police officer. Remember what I said earlier on? You've got to write the report to the police. It is not a report to your friends, your teacher, or your neighbor. Therefore, it has to be addressed to the investigation police officer. So the recipient here is the investigation police officer. You need to clearly indicate who the sender is. You need to have a subject line or the topic. You need to make reference to a house burglary. Have logically arranged details. It is important that your details are arranged logically. That is very, very important. They should follow a specific order. At the end, you need to sign and date the report. The tone thereof must be formal and polite. Remember, when we talk of the tone, that is the language. Whatever language you use, it will create the tone. It gives us the tone. It sets the tone in a text. So in this instance, because you're writing to a policeman, it has to be formal and it has to be polite. Before we move on to the next transactional text, reflect on the brief regarding our report. Number one, reflect on the guidelines that I've given you. And then at the end of the presentation, you need to respond to that brief. So this far, how many activities are you expected to respond to? 3. So at the end of my presentation, we need to work. You need to write a report. You also need to write a magazine article. That is also one of the texts that you need to do. Don't forget. And I believe that your teachers are taking note of all of these activities that you need to do, and they will make a follow-up on that. Let's have a look at our fourth transactional text, which is a speech. This is either formal or informal. What is really a speech? When you talk of a speech, what is a speech? A speech is a written account of an oral address with a specific purpose in mind. The purpose will be determined by the topic. A good speech is noted for its ability to capture and retain audience attention. So whatever speech that one renders, it has to capture and retain the audience attention. You don't want to lose your audience. The speech must include the following: the purpose. Why are you writing that speech? And the audience. It is important that you can identify the audience. The tone and the register. These are also very, very important. They should be appropriate for the audience. Remember what I said about the tone, that is the language. And what about the register? When one talks about the register, that is the degree of formality. And that should be appropriate for the audience. It can either be formal or informal. It has to be in a paragraph form. So it's a must that your speech is in a paragraph form, not in point form. It should be in a paragraph form. You need to have opening or greetings. And that is where you've got to be brief and simple. You need not come up with a long, complicated greetings. Your greetings must be kept brief and they've got to be very simple. You also need to have an introduction that captures the listener's attention. So your introduction must capture the listener's attention. You need to have well-developed points. Here you've got to at least highlight 3 to 4 key ideas and discuss each in a paragraph. So your ideas need to follow a specific order as well. They need to follow a specific organization. It is very, very important. You also need to have a suitable conclusion. Right. Let's just recap the guidelines there. The tone and register should be appropriate for the audience. must be in a paragraph form. You need to have opening or greetings. Keep it brief and simple. You need to have an introduction. You need to have well-developed points and a suitable conclusion. So that is our guidelines. Let's have a look at the activity now. Remember, at the back of your mind, you need to keep the guidelines because they will enable you to respond well to the brief. Let's have a look at the brief. It says, your best friend will be getting married soon. Wow, that's good news. And you have been invited to speak at the wedding. It's about a friend, not just any other friend, but your best friend. What will be happening? Your best friend will be getting married. And what is expected of you? You have been invited at this wedding and you are expected to deliver a speech. That is our instruction. Write a speech that you will deliver at the wedding. So from that brief, you are already being given the purpose and the audience. The nature of the occasion will inform your audience. And the purpose, of course, it says a friend, a very close friend, your best friend is getting married. And you are now expected to deliver that speech at the wedding. Right, let's have a look at the guidelines for that aspect. Speech at a wedding. The speech should be written using a suitable salutation or greetings. It has to be suitable. Suitable to what? Suitable to the audience. Remember, the nature of the occasion is a wedding celebration. So your greetings should be suitable to your audience. The tone and the register. Don't forget what we mean by the register. The register, as well as the tone, they should be appropriate for the audience. The register is the degree of formality. The tone, the language that you would use would give us the tone. So those two, they need to be appropriate for the audience. The speech must include the following: purpose and audience. The introduction thereof must attract attention. Points must be developed well. I repeat, points must be developed well. It means your ideas should follow a specific order. There should be a link between your points. There should be some kind of a synergy. And that would show us that you have developed your points very well. A conclusion must also be included. So that gives us the guidelines to follow when you write a speech. Before we take a short break, I just need to bring this to your attention. And that is the weighting and the rubrics. Remember, longer transactional pieces will be assessed according to a specific criteria. And this is the criteria: the content, the planning, and the format, which carries 18 marks, giving us the percentage of 60%. The second criteria there is language, style, and editing. The marks thereof is 12. And that gives us 40% of the text. So each and every longer transactional piece has a total of 30 marks. And do you know what's the good news here? You can get 30 out of 30. And I'm sure a lot of you are saying, but how? I've never got 30 out of 30. You definitely can get 30 out of 30. I have given you the guidelines. We have come up with different questions or activities and the guidelines which will actually enable you to write a good transactional piece. But before I show you how to get the 30, let us now take a 5-minute break. Thank you for now. Welcome back. Before we move, let us quickly recap all the activities that you need to do at the end of this session. You need to do a review. Use the provided guidelines to assist you in writing a good piece. You also need to do a magazine article. You need to use the provided guidelines as well to enable you to give us a good piece. The third activity is a report. You need to write a report. And lastly, you need to write a speech. Those are the 4 activities that I'm expecting you to do at the end of this presentation. Your teacher will assist you in terms of the guidelines, what you need to put and what you need to leave out. However, if you were to stick to the guidelines, you would definitely get it right. All of the best in those 4 activities. Right. Let's have a look at the weighting and the rubrics as well. I've also made mention of this, that in any longer transactional piece, that piece will be assessed according to the following criteria. Remember the criteria that I've said earlier? The content, planning, as well as format. That gives us 18 marks. The language, the style, and editing out of 12, giving us 40%. And the total thereof is 30. I know that most of you are looking forward to getting 30 out of 30. It's a promise that I made, and it's a promise that I'm going to keep. Let's now move to the rubric for a longer transactional text. Please note that it is important that you understand the rubric. There's no way that you can give us a good piece if you do not understand the rubric. The rubric on its own enables you to write what is expected of you. Whereas, if you don't understand the rubric, there's no way that you would give us a good piece. So let's have a look at the rubric and understand exactly how this is being used. I know most of you have written a number of transactional text and you were being given feedback. Your teacher wrote C, which stands for content. Maybe he wrote 10 marks. And language, he just gave you 3. But do you really understand how you arrived at the 10 for content? Do you really understand how you arrived at 2, 3, 4 for language? Because that is not just a number. That is feedback. But if you don't understand the rubric, you won't be able to understand the feedback. As a result, you won't be able to improve on the mistakes that you might have committed in your transactional text. So let us have a look at the rubric here. Let's have a look at the criteria. We spoke about it in the previous slide. And the criteria here, we've got content, we've got planning, and we've got the format. And that is made up of 18 marks. We also have language, style, and editing, which is made up of 12 marks, giving us a total of 30. Now, let us have a look at the first criterion there, which addresses content, planning, and format. When one talks of content, what do we really mean? There are 3 aspects that we need to look at when we judge content. And what are those three aspects? That is the response, ideas, as well as organizations. Allow me to write that on the side so that you get a clear understanding of all of these aspects. We've got the response, right. Let me just go back. Right, we've got the response there. We've got the ideas. We also have organization. We talk of organization or coherence. These three aspects, they should assist you in judging the content. And what do we mean when we talk of the response? That is the response to the brief. Have you answered the question? Have you responded to the brief? And if you have, how well have you responded to the brief? Your response will be informed by the ideas that you will put across. What about those ideas? Are the ideas relevant to the brief? And are they well organized? That brings in the organization or coherence. So your ideas must follow a specific order. They need to follow a specific organization. There should be a link between your ideas. There should be some kind of a synergy. And that would enable us to talk of well developed ideas. So it is important that you take note of those three aspects. Your response to the brief, the ideas, are they relevant to the brief? And are your ideas well organized? Are they well presented? The way you are going to bring out the response, the ideas, and the organization, to a larger extent, that would be informed by the audience as well as the purpose. The purpose of the text and the audience. So there we go. We've got the purpose there and the audience. And lastly, we've got features, which will now address the format. So it is important that you understand all of those when we talk of content. Let's move on to the second criterion there, which is the language. The one that I said you normally see capital letter L, and next to it, your teacher will give you a mark. But what does that mark mean? Let's get to it now. Right. When one talks of the language, we're referring to the tone, we're referring to the register, we're referring to the style. And all of those three are influenced by the purpose as well. They're influenced by our audience as well. Remember what we said about the tone. The tone is informed by the language of the text. The language used creates a specific environment and therefore gives us the tone of the text. And what is the register? This is the degree of formality. How formal is the piece? The degree thereof. And what about the style? The style is the word choice. So I'm sure as I explain all of these, you can see they all point to language. So whatever language you would use, it will be informed by the purpose as well as the audience. What you also need to take note of in this criterion is that we also look at the language use. It is very, very important that the grammar, the sentence construction, it is appropriate. Should be well punctuated and your words correctly spelled. So all of these, they inform the language, the style, and the editing. So next time when you see language and you see 12, you must understand how you arrived at this 12, which is a total, by the way. It means you would have met all the required descriptors in our language column there. Okay. So let's go back to the content and the language style and editing. That is both criterions. Each of those is made up of 5 categories. The content has 5 categories, the language has 5 categories. And those categories are, the first category is said to be an exceptional category, and it ranges from 15 to 18 marks. The second one is a skillful category, which ranges from 11 to 14 marks. The third category is an average category or moderate category, and it ranges from 8 to 10. The fourth one, elementary. This one ranges from 5 to 7 marks. And the last one is inadequate, and it ranges from 0 to 4 marks. Those categories, they address content. What do we mean by an exceptional category? In some instances, we call it a wow category because of the nature of the piece. It's a wow piece. It's exceptional because the response thereof is beyond normal expectation. It is not what the teacher expects from a grade 12 learner. It is something beyond that. That is wow. That is why it's called a wow piece. We also have a skillful one. This is a very good piece. You know, the response thereof is very good. We have a moderate category, and that category is said to be an average one. To be honest with you, I don't think we need to settle for average category. Grade 12 learners, we cannot settle for average because we can do better. We are the best. So we need to go either skillful or exceptional. Let's have a look at the elementary category. That one, some elements in the response, they address the brief. Some elements, they don't. There's a little bit of light, and then you get lost as a teacher when you read that piece. Then you go back, oh, you see some light, and then before you even know it, you are again in the dark. So some of the ideas that have been brought there, they address the text, whereas some don't. And that is why it is said to be elementary. And lastly, we've got inadequate, which is called poor in this instance. In this case, the response reveals no knowledge of features of the type of text that you are expected to answer. So those are the 5 categories that we need to address. Remember, each of those categories, starting with the exceptional to inadequate, each of those categories has descriptors for that particular category. I'll just give you an example. The descriptors for exceptional, we've got outstanding response beyond normal expectations, intelligent and mature ideas, extensive knowledge of features of the type of text, writing maintains focus, coherence in content and ideas, highly elaborated and all details support the topic, appropriate and accurate format. Those are our descriptors. So, what do the descriptors do? The descriptors describes the response to the brief. They tell us how well have you responded to the brief. And that is what will either give you an exceptional category, a skillful, a moderate, an elementary, or inadequate. So it is very, very important that you familiarize yourself with all the descriptors in each and every category, so that when a teacher gives you 2, or gives you 4, or gives you 18 for that matter, you understand where the 18 comes from. You also have to look at each category there. We've got the highest mark and the lowest mark in each of those categories. What does the highest mark mean? It means you have met all the required descriptors in your transactional text. And what does the lowest mark mean? It means you have met minimum requirements of that category. And what does, in this case, a 16 or a 17 would mean? It means you have met some of the requirements or some of the descriptors in that category. Are we together then? So it is important that you understand this aspect. In the first place, we've got the criteria, which is informed by response, ideas, organization, and then from each and every criterion, we've got categories. Each category is made up of descriptors. What do the descriptors do? The descriptors describe. What do? They describe the way in which you would have responded to the brief, addressing the content. Now, let's have a look at the language aspect there. It has the same categories: exceptional, skillful, moderate, elementary, and inadequate. The only difference here is the mark allocation. For exceptional category, we've got 10 to 12. For skillful, we've got 8 to 9. For moderate, we've got 6 to 7. For elementary, we've got 4 to 5. And for inadequate, we've got 0 to 3. And what does that mean? Remember what I said about the language. The language is being addressed by the tone, the register, which is the degree of formality, the style, which is the word choice, and that is being informed by the purpose and the audience. Right? And also you need to take care of the language use, which includes word choice, punctuations, and the spelling. In each of those categories, we also have descriptors. Let us just have a look at the first category, which is exceptional under language, and see what is being said about those descriptors. It says there, the tone, the register, and the style and vocabulary highly appropriate to purpose, audience, and context. See that? grammatically accurate and well constructed, virtually error-free. So if you are being given 12 for that, it means you would have met all of those descriptors in that corner or in that category. If you are being given a 10, you have not met all of them. You might have met one or two. If you are being given an 11, some of the descriptors are covered there, but not all. So that is how we arrive at the allocation of marks. So every time when you get feedback from your teacher in a form of the total mark awarded for your piece, go back to that category in terms of content. Go back to that category in terms of language and see that which you might have achieved in that category. And that would explain the mark that has been allocated. If for argument's sake you feel that you have covered almost everything and you actually could have been given a total that is 18 in this case or 12 in this case, then you read your piece, right? And maybe your teacher will explain to you that, yes, you have covered almost everything. However, regarding the content, you have not made an elaboration. You have not highly elaborated on the details that you have given. There should be that aspect as well. Or maybe you might be having, just a minor a format error there. And the teacher will explain to you. So it is very, very important that you understand where the mark comes from. And you can go back, given the feedback that the teacher has given you, and say, oh, okay, that is why I got an 18. That is why I got a 7. That is why I got a 10 for content, for argument's sake. And for language, you would also understand why you got 8, why you got 4. The 4 is being informed by the descriptors in that category, and those descriptors, they address language style and editing. And that is also informed by the audience as well as the purpose. Don't forget those two aspects. They're very, very important. The purpose of the text and your audience. I would love to believe that you now have an idea of how your work is being marked, how we use the rubric. And that would also encourage you to write a good piece at the end of this presentation, because you now know what would give you an 18. You now know what would give you a 14 for content and what would give you a 12 for language. You know. So address those descriptors in each and every category in any other transactional text that you are being given. Speak to those descriptors, address them. The response. How well have you responded? The ideas thereof, right? Are they relevant to the brief? Are the ideas well organized? The presentation of your ideas. Have you taken into consideration your audience and the purpose? The same goes to the language aspect. The tone, the register, the style. Have you taken into consideration the audience as well as the purpose? Your sentence construction as well as your punctuations and your spelling. So you need to do good editing there at the end of each and every text. Right. Let's now move to the recommendations. What is it that you need to do so as to attain the highest mark as per this rubric? Remember, you can get 30 out of 30. It is attainable. You just need to address what is needed. Right, let's have a look at the recommendations. The first thing that you need to do when you look at the topic, you've got to analyze the text. That's number one. Identify keywords and stick to the guidelines given. You cannot respond well to the brief if you have not yet analyzed the text, because the analysis will give you the purpose, the analysis will give you the audience, the analysis will register the tone, the style, and the register. So it is important that you do that. Right. You've got to write legibly. Some learners underperform not because they don't know the answers, they don't know what to write, only because of the handwriting. So work on your handwriting. Pay attention to spelling, punctuations, and etc. Edit the writing piece thoroughly. Check it at least 3 times. Always draw a line through all rough drafts. It is important that you draw a line. The draft must be edited so that it does not look like an identical neat copy. This is very, very important. Formats for transactional writing pieces are still a problem. And that's a very serious concern. So what you need to do to address that challenge, you need to study all formats, e.g., format of a letter to the editor, format of a dialogue, format of a speech, and etc. You need to study those and use the appropriate format for the different genres. So I'm looking forward to a time where we wouldn't be having problems or challenges when it comes to different formats of different genres. Right. We all know that this paper carries the highest mark, don't we? Yes, we do. Which is 100 marks. So what does that mean? It means that more time should be spent on learning creativity. More time should be spent on practicing and improving writing, which includes your writing skills and format of transactional text. And how do you do that? You've got to use past papers to practice. Have you seen that I've used past papers in this presentation? Those 4 activities are taken from the past papers. So please use those activities as practice on improving your writing skills, as practice on improving your format of transactional text, as well as your creativity. And at the end of it, you can get even 100 out of 100. Yes, you can get that. I can see some of you don't believe me, eh? Okay, you can get 90 plus. Okay, yeah, some of you are saying yes, that is attainable. But I'm quite happy if you see it that way. Refer to the study guide. I would love to believe that you all have eFal Paper 3 study guides. All schools have been given this study guides, so you need to refer to that study guide. You need to refer to this presentation. You've got to listen to the presentation and refer to your study guide. Give yourself some time to practice the skills that are needed in each and every transactional text. That is very, very important. If you can do that, I know that you will do well. And that is the study guide that I'm talking about. Study guide for writing essays and transactional text. That brings us now to the end of this session. I would like to wish you everything of the best in your year ahead. Thank you for watching this lesson. Please remember to sanitize, to wear your mask, maintain social distancing, and keep safe. See you next time. Goodbye.